Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Exit Wound. I'm your host, Melanie Thompson. So today we're continuing the journey, tracing the steps from survivors when they first exit, all the way to when they become a leader and an advocate. One of the biggest transitions that survivors go through and face after they exit the life is getting into the workplace and dealing with the 9-to-5 dramas. We feel a lot of different emotions when we get our first job after the life. Terrified, excited, lonely, but comforted. So to help me work through all of this workplace drama is my dear friend, established and esteemed leader and survivor, Gina Cavallo. How are you, Gina?
Good. Hi,
Thank
Melanie.
you for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure being with you, sitting alongside of you.
This is going to be a really good episode. I already have a feeling, so I'm excited.
Me too.
If you're comfortable sharing, would you mind telling me how old you were when you were trafficked?
I was 19.
I ask all of my guests just to show the world that this can happen at various ages across the board. Okay, so do you remember the first job that you had when you first got out of the life?
I do. I clearly remember what it was.
Walk me through those feelings. How was it for you when you first got a job that had nothing to do with trauma or trafficking?
I do want to backstep a little bit regarding the trauma, and it was very difficult self-identifying.
Yeah.
And I didn't consider it coming out of the life. I considered it coming out of a hell.
Yeah.
Because there was no life in there. But I recall as a child, and I didn't realize it at the time, that there were seeds that were being planted that were literally grooming me.
Yeah.
I don't believe that the people that were supposed to love me were intentionally saying, oh, I'm going to groom her.
Yeah.
But I think we learn things through generational. People teach you what they were taught, and it gets passed down. So I had a very difficult time self-identifying with the word domestic violence. I had a difficult time relating to the word abuse, different forms of abuse, nevertheless trauma.
Yeah.
It was just something that was ingrained in me, like layers upon layers.
Yeah.
So when I eventually became a victim of sex trafficking and ended up finding my way to escape from that life, coming back home, it was like, everything gets swept under the carpet, and children, whatever age you are, it doesn't matter, you're a child at any age, should be seen and not heard. But where do you go? Who do you talk to about it? Because you're not believed. And for me, it was even difficult trying to connect with myself, with what happened, because I believed that everything that happened to me was my fault. So who's going to believe me? Where do I go with this? Who's going to be that safe person? And so going back into the work, like I remember getting a job for social services. I was like an assistant to a social worker.
Okay.
And I never felt like I fit in. But it wasn't just the work life. It was anywhere.
Right.
It was even as a child. It didn't mean I didn't want to fit in. It meant I didn't fit in.
Yeah.
I couldn't identify with the word domestic violence, with abuse, with sex trafficking, with any word at all. But I was able to identify with the word fitting in. And I didn't fit in, but I would fake it. So if I was with my coworkers at lunchtime, I did my job to the best I could, but I also struggled with learning disabilities, which added another layer where people think that disabilities are something that's visible. And, a lot of times people don't realize that you can have disabilities and they're not visible.
In other ways.
Right? In other ways.
We don't talk about that enough when it comes to this movement, but also just in general when it comes to survivors. There are so many, in so many of the other episodes, the previous episodes we've talked a lot about those different feelings and feeling like we're not part of this group and et cetera, et cetera. But we never touch upon the disabilities aspect, right? And even we have learning disabilities, you have physical, you have mental disabilities, and we have a lot of survivors that suffer in silence with those things, and they're not highlighted or talked about in the movement. So I love that you brought that up. Tell me, what were some, in addition to that, what you said, what were some of the mental and emotional hurdles that you think you were facing in that first job when you were working as this assistant to the social worker? Did you have any challenges emotionally or mentally in that office?
Definitely. Aside from not feeling, I would say, believing that you fit in, that self-confidence, it was a struggle because you're constantly trying to fit in, or go to lunch with coworkers and they're talking about all these things that you can understand, but you can't relate to. Whether it's family get-togethers and what they did with their friends or what they did outside, extracurricular activity, whatever that may look like. And I would just jump in and make oh yeah, like I totally can relate to that. Right. And this is what I did. And I'm I had no idea what I was talking about. It was I just wanted you to know that I was normal. Right. But I never felt normal, whatever normal is supposed to feel like or look like, because all those seeds that were planted, there was definitely dysfunctions, there was definitely trauma, there was definitely so many different forms of abuse that I struggled with that were sitting there dormant. And all I knew is that I was on the defense too, because there was a part of my behavior that if you had to address something to me that rightfully so needed to be addressed about my job or my work function, I wasn't in tune at the time. I wasn't aware. But looking back, what I was aware at, it was my reaction, not even my response. I was having a difficult time receiving people. If you got too close to me, I was having a difficult time receiving the fact that you were telling me I did something wrong, because my whole life everyone was telling me what I did was wrong. I was worthless, I was stupid, I was being criticized. But then there's the trust issues, being able to trust, whether it be a personal relationship or a professional relationship, and trust and feeling safe is really important too,
Absolutely. No, I love that. You said so many great things there. One of the things that I'm hearing in a lot of what you've been saying so far is this connection between what we feel about ourselves in a personal capacity and how that relates into the workplace. And then on the other hand, I'm hearing you talk about the importance of trust when it comes to any kind of relationship. How hard it is to come into spaces with our mindsets and all the things that have happened to us or that we've gone through, and learning how to build trust with other people. That's difficult to do without a job. Just to make a friend, or just to walk into a space and feel like you can trust somebody with anything. Even the smallest thing that to somebody else would be like nothing. I'm like, what are you going to do to me? And I started laughing in my head just now when you were talking, because I lied all the time. I never felt like I could fit in anywhere. And I'll just be like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, me too. Yeah, not me. I didn't know anything.
Right.
So, okay. So would you say that you had any logistical struggles separate from your thoughts and feelings? Did you struggle in your first job out of the life? Were things difficult for you to grasp? Or would you say that just kind of fitting into the 9-to-5 work practices, was that hard for you?
Yeah, of course it was, because when you're in that life, sleep, food, drugs, pornography, there's so many layers that are used as reward and punishment. And I definitely didn't have structure, nevertheless didn't know what was happening around me. As far as a time or a clock, I had no idea if anyone ever asked me what time of the day it was. I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
You know,
that's real.
and being moved around a lot. I mean, I had no sense of myself, nevertheless, of being cognitive of what was going on around me. So coming into a workplace of 9 to 5 was like, that was like really weird. And it was difficult. I mean, the great thing was that I had this opportunity because the guy, the personnel person who hired me for this position, he turned out to be my husband. We ended up getting married. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, we fell head over heels in love. And in fact, he was the only one I told about my past. I told him everything because we were going to get married. But then through that relationship, I learned to bury my secrets again and never to tell another soul again. Because after we married, we had our first big fight. Because this is where trust comes in. You know, we had our first big fight, and it was Thanksgiving time. And he says, come on, we have to get ready, go to my parents for turkey dinner. And I was like, I can't make believe and go to your parents for a turkey dinner like everything's okay. And long story short, he went without me. That evening he came home and he says, I'm so sorry. He says, about what I'm about to tell you. He says, I was so angry that you didn't come with me today that I told my parents about your past. And they told me if I didn't divorce you that they would disown me. And so what I learned from that moment was, yes, trust was huge, huge. And I also learned, you know what? I got to bury this crap. I can never tell a living soul as long as I live. Before my life went on with other careers, I took a turn for the worse. I mean, I just wanted to die. I wanted to end it. Like, I didn't have the courage, though, to cut myself or anything gory. But I was hoping the drugs that, you know, I wouldn't wake up one day. But until the police did me a favor one day and they arrested me. They were after somebody, and I was driving on the wrong side of the highway. So they arrested me, and it was at that point, after my husband divorced me, that I realized that I had some really deep issues between, you know, struggling with suicide, struggling with the secrets of my past, struggling with alcohol and drugs now. And so I went for help, and I overcame my drugs and alcohol. And then you know, when we talk about housing issues and things like that, it was like, it wasn't a 30-day program. I had to go away for a few years to restructure my life. And from a 30-day rehab, they kept me for 6 months. And then I went into a halfway house. They kept me for a year. And then community living, which helped me rebuild the structure of that 9 to 5. And what happened with that is that I went into healthcare facilities, and what they found with me, it was a quality that I didn't even realize I had, was confidentiality. Is that people, although I didn't trust people, people trusted me because I didn't repeat things. People found me to be a safe person, and maybe it's because I wanted you to be that safe person. So what I didn't have, I wanted to give to you. So although they say hurt people, that is true. But I didn't want to be that person, you know, so I wanted to lead by example. But although I went through my rehabilitation, I still kept the secrets of being in the life buried. That was difficult. But I learned when I was in healthcare, I was called to my administrator one day, and my administrator said to me, hey, they said, we have a problem in our personnel department. We have like major breach of confidentiality, and we need somebody in there, and we trust you. And I said, well, I was like, well, that's awesome, but the only problem is that I have zero education
on this,
in personnel, in HR. Human resources is not my educational background. I ended up being put in that department. Didn't know what I was doing, but there were people to support me. And I remember one day, I mean, they really created a monster out of me because I didn't realize I had these skills. So I remember at the time I had this advocacy in me. early on, and it hurt me and it helped me. So it helped me in the sense that they had a 65% turnover with employees, and I wanted to zoom in on what the problem was. And what the problem was is that not only the employees needed in servicing, but so did the management. Because management, so if you walked in late, management would think nothing of writing you up. Oh, you're late? They didn't care if you had a crisis at home. They didn't care if you had car problems. They didn't care if you had to get your son off to school. They didn't care. They were just like misusing their authority, and they were like, oh, I'm going to give her a write-up. And so I zoomed in on that, and I addressed that, and I turned that around. I said, you cannot write up employees. You need to in-service them. You need to be empathetic. You need to be compassionate. You need to listen. You need to build that relationship and help them. You don't know what people are going through. They're not just employees. We are human beings.
That makes me think of this idea of respect in the workplace, right? And I think we as Americans are taught to respect our bosses, respect who's responsible for the paycheck, but it's never taught in the reverse, right? It's never taught to be nice to your employees and respect your employees as humans and as good people that are contributing to the betterment of a company or an organization. And I think this is a good place to segue into the whole point of this episode, right? This episode is called Workplace Misfit. I think it's safe to say that a lot of people in the workforce feel like misfits, right? All of us. But for survivors in particular, I feel like the workforce and the workplace there's an added layer that goes way deeper and beneath the surface for us compared to other people that are in the workforce. Wouldn't you agree? So one of the things that I love about us as survivors and people that have lived through crazy things is how different we are from everybody else. How, we can say that we're resilient, we can say we've persevered, et cetera, but we are also very extraordinary. Unfortunately, though, when it comes to the workforce, especially the 9-to-5 corporate world, things like that, our extraordinariness, I don't even know if that's a word, but our extraordinary nature, usually it's not the norm. It's not what you see in the corporate 9-to-5. It's not what we're taught as workplace respectability politics, right? And a lot of people can't handle that. They can't handle our directness. They can't handle the experiences that we bring to the table. They can't handle the way that we communicate with each other. So because of all of our extraordinary nature, we're oftentimes in the workforce, especially in that first or second job you get out of the life, we're forced to conform in a lot of ways. We're forced to follow these practices, and especially when you work in a nonprofit organization and you have to support the mission and look good for the people running the organization or their donors, or you can be your whole survivor self but with limitations. How do we get these organizations, these corporate companies, these employers, how do we get them to value us and value what makes us different and respect that rather than trying to tame us or call it an inconvenience? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a loaded.
I know.
That's a lot.
We can be here forever.
Like I was just going to say, I'm going to be here a couple days. Wow.
Get into it. I know, the reason I knew that I wanted to invite you to this conversation because I know in the work that we do, we face this all the time, in different ways, but all with the same issue, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I know for me, I'm a very direct. I would say I'm kind of loud. I don't think I'm shouting, but I'm a pretty loud person, and I stand by what I stand on, and I don't waver in that, right? And I often speak to people the same way I'm speaking to you right now. I just say it like it is. I tell you what I'm thinking, and if you don't like it, you don't like it. Mm-hmm. But I meant what I said, right? And if I'm wrong in any capacity, I'll follow up on that later. But because of my directness, a lot of people find that to be intimidating or rude or, so I feel like when I was on the streets, this is how we communicated. And people understood my directness to mean love or care. But in the workplace, it's not accepted. Have you had experiences like this? What do you think about how do we get folks to recognize the real Gina without having to conform to workplace standards?
That's all great. I mean, like I said, I'll give you a few examples. First of all, I am a great believer, and I got to know myself really well. Mm-hmm. In fact, I remember when I started counseling, my counselor says, "What do you want to get out of this?" I said, "Not so much of what she did to me, what he did to me, what the world did to me, what my family did to me. It was more important for me to understand me, because understanding yourself really is the compass, your map to your direction in life, where you're going to get to that cross point where you're going to say, in the life or out of the life, am I going to continue to conform to how he or she tells me how to walk, how to talk, how to dress, what to wear, what I'm going to eat today? Or am I going to be in control of my life? Because if you're doing the right thing, if you're saying the right thing, if you believe in what you're saying, you have to advocate for yourself. Yep. And no one should waver on that. I don't care if it's a corporation, if it's a workplace, if it's a non-for-profit. I have the mindset I'd rather stand on a mountaintop by myself if it means standing for the right reason. I don't need anyone rallying alongside of me or behind me. I will. For me, it's a principle. And a lot of people, unfortunately, it's very difficult to get to that place. Mm-hmm. But it was a lot of, they say if you don't heal what hurt you, you'll bleed on others who didn't cut you.
That's true.
And I was going around hurting others, not intentionally, but I was also tired of getting cut. Mm-hmm. So, we could take what happened to us in our personal new life, in our professional new life, in our relationships, and it will just continue to follow us. Mm-hmm. The very first thing to the core of your question is starting that healing journey and what that looks like. Yeah. It could look different for all of us. For me, it was like, really, I needed to find and hold on to something that I believed, which was I learned to cultivate my faith again. For anybody, it could be the universe, it could be a doorknob. It doesn't really matter. For me, it was my faith. And I needed to start self-discovering. And I needed not to empower people anymore. I was tired of people intimidating me, but I was also allowing it. It's like you can't say, like, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink it. So if somebody has a drug problem, an alcoholic problem, or if someone is struggling with any of the above, even being a victim of any crime, it's like, if you don't know, how are you supposed to get through it, get out of it? Right. But once you do know, once you are able to identify, now what are you going to do about it? How do we do this in our life, especially, as you said, as survivors? You don't cave. You cannot empower a job, a non-for-profit, corporate, non-corporate, and make them bigger than God. You cannot do that. Yeah. As soon as we do that, we're going to fall. Yeah. We were all born with instincts, Melanie. All of us. Mm-hmm. Mine are no better than yours. We were all born with the nose, the ears, the insides of us, everything that keeps us together, to think, how we react, how we respond. And we need to trust that more. When you feel a certain way, when they say, what's the red flags? And I'm like, why do you keep asking, what are the red flags to human trafficking? What are the signs we should look for? What are the symptoms? And I'm like, stop, I'll tell you what the red flag, here, right here. When something feels wrong, it probably is wrong.
Right.
If something sounds wrong or looks wrong, it's probably wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, even with nonprofit, I mean, there's no perfect, right? But I will tell you this, I would not be standing alongside of the nonprofit I am if they were trying to remake me, if they were trying to make my voice different, if they were trying to tokenize me, patronize me, exploit me, because as survivors, we could pick that up like that.
Quickly.
Okay? So when we minimize what we're feeling and what's happening at the time, we're doing such a big disservice to ourselves, but also we're sending messages out there to other survivors that is not what you should be doing. You need to stand up and take a fight for yourself. So if you're bringing one survivor to the table, one is not enough, and 0 is unacceptable.
Right.
Don't try to call us into a meeting after you already had a meeting.
Right.
Don't try to ask us, what do you think? But you really already know what you're going to do or what you think. You can't do that.
Or we give them our answer, but they don't like it. So
they don't like it because it's about, in cases like that, it's more because it's about them.
Yeah.
They're not making it about the issue. So for me, I'm really careful on who I associate with personally and professionally. Because if I have to relive and struggle with those types of individuals personally or professionally, I'm doing such a great disservice to myself.
In a sense, I feel like in part this contributes to feeling like a workplace misfit, because especially, both, I know you and I and all of the other guests that have been on this podcast so far are all esteemed, prominent anti-trafficking advocates. And most of us, we all have our jobs and hustles and side businesses, but most of us do some kind of anti-human trafficking work. And we are the true experts. Now, I did say in my last episode, allyship is important, and we don't take away from that at all. However, nothing about us without us. And because we are the ones who've lived it, who've seen it, who have felt it, not only are we the true experts, but I think it contributes to how we feel in these spaces, because we know that we should be the loudest voice in the room. We know that we should be the most supported voice in the room. And yet somehow, some way, we still have to meet with each other at the end of our events to talk about what we're feeling, or to talk about the displacement, or to be sitting at your desk in your office and feeling like you're still not fully understood and listened to. And I feel like this is something that needs to be addressed, but it's also something that needs to be highlighted, and we're not highlighting those feelings enough. It's very difficult for anybody to start a new job anywhere because we're human. So you have nerves, you have the fear of meeting new people, you might have social anxiety. That's for everybody in the world, right? But for survivors in particular, it's even harder to have all of those regular human feelings and then add a layer of anxiety because of your trauma, or add a layer of confusion because of a disability, or, there's so many other things that we have to experience. And I know for me personally, I never quite, like you said earlier, fit in anywhere. I've tried anti-trafficking jobs. I've tried being in this movement. And I just always feel like I'm either a step ahead of everybody else in the room because of what I've lived through and seen, or a step behind because nobody's listening to me.
If you have to constantly go up against what you feel and know is wrong, then you need to bring other people alongside of you to help them understand. But if they're not willing to listen, it's time to move on.
Yeah. I think I'm learning that the hard way.
And that's a big step.
Yeah.
That's a big step, but that's how we empower ourselves, and that's how we cultivate our own skills. And we realize, wow, I did it. You just take that little step every time. That little step becomes a big step. And then you take another step. And then you're like, wow, look at what I did. Look what I was able to achieve, because you're not empowering others. You know, there comes a time where you have to use good discernment and say, I'm more than that. I am more than this. You know?
It's funny. I've actually heard this word discernment come up a couple times throughout our episode. So I just love to see how I can speak to each of you guys at different times, different days, individually, but we all have a very similar mindset.
Yeah.
And I think that's what distinguishes us from the people that we're surrounded with in our workplaces, our colleagues, our coworkers who are our allies, and our advocates who are non-survivors. I feel like just this unspoken understanding that we as survivors all have, not even knowing each other's conversations or stories. It's fascinating. So I want to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. And for those of you who don't know, imposter syndrome is when you doubt your accomplishments, your worthiness, and you constantly feel afraid of being outed as a fraud. Some of the most successful people suffer with imposter syndrome. And I know I've had my bouts with it a while ago when I first started getting into advocacy. Have you ever felt this way? Have you ever felt like secretly somewhere, no matter how well you're doing or how high on the ladder you're climbing, you feel like people are going to out me as a fraud? And if you haven't felt that way, then you need to tell me your secret, because I've definitely felt that way.
No, for sure. For my healing journey, it's not like I could say, hey, Melanie, you know, I have mentors. I have my support groups. I go on my retreats. I go to conferences. I see my counselor as needed. But I arrived, Melanie. There's no such thing as I arrived. If somebody says to me, oh, yeah, I did that, but I'm all better now. And I'm like, oh, now I want to know your secret.
Right.
Because it's like, it doesn't work that way, because you're always addressing the triggers, always addressing the trauma. And I always feel like I could definitely relate to the imposter syndrome, but I feel like this collision, like caught between two worlds, the old tapes and the new. And the old tapes will always make a play. Like maybe when I'm, you know, in a situation and whatever that might look like, and all of a sudden the old tape will come in and say, see, you're not enough. You didn't do good enough. But you know what? I'm aware because I'm on that healing journey, and I have my tool belt that I do use. I know what I need to do.
Yeah.
And I will say this, though. I mean, I've gotten countless awards. You don't do it for awards.
Right.
But there's a disassociation, too. It's like receiving it. It's like, oh, you know, that's nice.
Yeah.
But I'm not connected to it, if that makes sense.
Oh, well, it does to me. I hope our listeners can understand that.
It doesn't make sense. And then I'm like, I'll never feel like, so realistically, I know I'm continuing to grow.
Yeah.
I know that I'm continuing to make a difference. I know where I was, where I'm, and where I am now, and wherever it's meant for my journey to continue taking me until I take my last breath. However, I still struggle at times that I'm enough, feeling deserving and worthy. It's like, I think that's a process. You know, it comes in time.
A lifelong one.
It's a lifelong.
For survivors, that's a lifelong process.
Yes.
And, you know, you have people in society who deal with generalized anxiety disorder. I think the new studies are coming out, 75-80% of the American population struggles with either depression or anxiety, right? For survivors, something that you mentioned is going back to that, what you called the old tapes, right? And for me, that's like that internal conflict. You know, for me, I would say that going back to imposter syndrome, this idea of imposter syndrome, it may not be the classic definition of imposter syndrome that survivors face, but I know we all struggle with that internal conflict. Because no matter how well or successful we do, that voice in the back of your head is always there. Always there.
Always.
You've gotten countless awards. I've gotten plenty of certificates. There's the accolades, physically, the tangible accolades are there. But the voice, it is so hard to shake that little man that stands in that corner that's like, what did I tell you? I told you weren't going to make it. Oh, like, and if you, and God forbid you have a bad day. If you have a bad day,
forget about it.
You just spiraled all the way down.
Yes.
And I was actually talking with somebody recently about that. And this is part of why we're misfits in this sense, right? The average person in their job could, I don't know, staple their finger by accident, right, while they're stapling papers. If a survivor staples their finger by accident, right, while they're stapling papers, they're like, oh man, that hurts. Then the little man is like, see, you're so stupid. How can you mess up like that? It's such a simple stapler. You're so dumb. And then for me, it goes even further. Now I hear my trafficker in my head. I told you weren't going to be good enough. I told you weren't going to be able to do any regular job. You don't deserve to be in the workforce.
So true.
And that's something, like I said, it's a lifelong journey to try to combat those thoughts. And those thoughts are intrusive. They are. When they come with full force. There's no way to, I used to tell, maybe I'm aging myself here, but I used to tell a lot of my friends and people I talk to, like, this is like a old school VCR tape. Mm-hmm. And when you put it in and you try to eject, it's like the eject button is broken.
Yeah.
That's what it's like for survivors that are dealing with these intrusive thoughts in the workplace. We have to deal with the regular pressures of being a normal person and dealing with anxiety of a new space, trying to learn all of the bylines and the bylaws and the guidelines of a new an employee handbook. You're trying to manage all these things. You're trying to manage your thoughts. You're trying to learn, your coworkers' names. You're trying to perfect your image physically and just dressing for work. And then that comes with a whole lot of thoughts too. Mm-hmm. So you're dealing with all of those things, and you still have this little man in your head that's just reminding you of all the things you're trying to get over and run away from and move forward from. But they just keep knocking and gnawing. And I want people who are listening, who might be an employer or somebody that's in a position to hire survivors, I want you to understand that when it comes to us, we have all of the pressures of your workplace and then some. Yeah. And I think it's the and then some that makes us never feel like we quite fit in. I see my colleagues like relating to each other over like things at home. Oh yeah, I miss my dog, or I'm gonna put up my Christmas tree, or and for survivors, if you were on the streets during the holidays, I grew up in foster care, if you went through any kind of institutionalization and you weren't able to be home with family for the holidays, if you don't have pets, if your pimp hurt your pet as a way to threaten you, there's so many different ways that there's so many different things that we have seen, and there's so many different ways that our lived experience has tainted average and normal things for us. Mm-hmm. It is hard to adapt to a normal and average workplace when you don't have a normal and average mind or lived experience,
Yeah. It's so much there. And, when you think about it, when we talk about labor and sex trafficking, everyone's surviving something in the world. Mm-hmm. Everyone. Mm-hmm. There's not one human being that hasn't struggled with something in their life, past, present, that they've spoken about or they have hidden in their closets, So I think we need more empathy, We need more compassion. We need more understanding. It brings me to this experience I had in the healthcare facility. this supervisor came to me and he brought me this warning notice, and he says, I sent her home for insubordination. I says, what did she do? I ended up changing a law right there and then. I was like, this is gonna stop. She brought her laundry to work. To do her laundry. Because
I bet she didn't have it at home.
And guess what the laundry was? They were all baby clothes.
Oh.
The electric and gas company turned off her electricity. She couldn't afford it. She needed clean clothes for her baby. And this dimwit goes and writes her up and sends her home, tells her to punch out. I went from 0 to 20. I'm
livid just hearing it.
I didn't care what you did to me, because I had my administrator to answer to. And I just needed to make a decision at that point, that I believed in. I didn't even go through the channels, So it turned out that I found out the electric was off. She couldn't afford it. And I called her back. And I reinstated her, and then I didn't write up the supervisor, but I gave him an in-service along with a verbal warning. And then I changed the whole procedure. I said nobody can ever write down a warning slip again to any employee unless it goes through the department. You just can't be pen happy for people that have authority, but they misuse their authority. It's the misusing. It's okay to have authority, but not when you're going to misuse it. Because when you misuse it on a human being, whether you think they deserve it or not, you cannot just, 3 strikes, you're out. You cannot do that until you sit down and listen. What is the problem? What are they struggling with? If they're struggling with something on the job that they're just having a hard time understanding, then that's your fault because you're not in servicing them properly. If people are not hearing us, Melanie, if we're not advocating for ourselves or for others, we're doing something wrong as human beings. I mean, we need to step up, even if it means, like I said earlier, standing on that mountaintop and we're by ourselves. It doesn't matter. We don't need cheerleaders.
Yeah, we don't.
We need to be doing the right thing is what we need to be doing.
You know what I like that you said in all of that? You mentioned the misuse of authority. And I think with that, and immediately when you said that, what it made me think of was what you said earlier in this episode about the trust piece. It's hard enough for survivors to trust anybody just because of all of these things that were inflicted on us. But what I wanted to bring up, what I noticed is this parallel, right? And I think that this is something that is really interesting to highlight. For survivors, part of feeling like we don't fit in is feeling uncomfortable in certain spaces, right? It may not necessarily be that we don't fit in. It could be that the space we're in doesn't fit in around us.
Right.
And I'm a big believer in that. And I love this analogy of standing on the mountaintop alone because we don't need cheerleaders. But I digress. So, this idea when you were talking about the misuse of authority, it's like that's a parallel to things that we've seen while we were being exploited. This misuse of power, this misuse of trust, this misuse of love that was used to subdue us, for lack of a better term. And the fact that we could be in a workplace and something could happen at work that could parallel that back in our mind to our lived experience is a very fascinating, not so fun fact.
Because there's people that are exploiting people in the workplace. And it may not be exploiting them in the sex trafficking
that way
arena, but we're talking about people that do exploit people in the workplace, and that's by misusing their authority, by thinking that, I am your boss, and this is the way it's going to be done. And I'll call you when I need you, and I'll listen to you if it fits into my agenda.
Right.
I emphasize to any employee, it's very difficult because, like we talked about, we have those old tapes we struggle with. Mm-hmm. And if an employer is going to say, hey, you know, you're doing this wrong, or you're this, or you're that, you know, that's going to trigger the old tapes and the reinforcement of what a failure I am. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I whatever I touch, it turns to crap, and I can't do this, and I'm a piece of crap, and I'm a this, and I'm a that. And you're off, the horses are off at the gates. You're just nothing but a POS, right? Mm-hmm. And they're affirming that, okay? And now you're just like, there sets in the depression again, the triggers, the trauma. You got to get out of that.
It's so
You can't
hard.
empower that person. You got to cut it. Yeah. You got to cut it like a bad infection.
All right, so I want to transition a little bit to talking about coworkers, but also I want to bear in mind that we might have some listeners who are survivors who are not in the workforce yet, right? We talked a little bit about what it's like being in the office or in any org or a corporation, but there are folks who might still be in school. Yeah. There are folks that may have exited the life, but they did not start their first job yet. So, you know, for the survivors that are in school right now, like this is a prime example. I remember feeling like the odd one out. In addition to feeling like I don't fit in at my job because of these things that we talked about, I'm often the only sex trafficking survivor in class, right? And that's also something that's not talked about. Going through school with this lived experience. Like, school, I think, for me was extremely difficult because, especially when you're younger, but like even in college, in a university setting, spring break comes around, holidays come around, right? And I'm seeing all my classmates or my peers or even just people that walk past me in the halls, they're all talking about where they're going to travel to for spring break, right? Or they're going to go see this family member, that family member for Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever have you. And they're doing all of these different things. But I'm thinking about the 3 jobs I have to fulfill after school for me to try to sustain myself, or, you know, me being somebody that was institutionalized, me having to like be forced to go see a judge after school, or not make it to class because I have to go to court, or me bouncing around from place to place. And there's so many other things that would make me feel like I couldn't fit in a school setting, right? So now I got what you were saying earlier. I don't feel I don't feel like I fit in at home, or I have these things from childhood. I don't feel like I fit in my own mind. I don't feel like I fit in my workplace. And now I don't feel like I fit in at school. I'm not like the regular kid that gets, like you were saying earlier when we both lie about it, I'm not the regular kid that gets to go to Disney World with I don't know. I've never been to Disney World. To this day, I have not been to Disney World, you know? But like I always felt like I was not the regular person that got to do regular things. I always felt like the kid that was too grown for her age or too old and experienced for her age that never just got to be a kid or have fun. Yeah. So if there were survivors listening to this that have those kind of experiences where they always feel like the odd one out because of what they went through, or that they feel like nobody can relate to them because nobody knows what it's like to be raped 1,000,000 times or beaten. Like, for those survivors that might be listening to this, what do you want to say to them about that? Is there anything you want to say to them?
Another loaded question.
I know.
Oh, a couple things here. First of all, there's no one size fits all.
Yep, no cookie cutter approaches over here.
Second of all, there's no I've arrived. Okay?
I love that.
When we get the mindset of I've arrived and I don't need counseling anymore, I don't need my support groups, I don't need retreats, I don't need this or that, we're going to set ourselves up to fall. This is a journey. It's a journey of healing, a process. So for me, just going to give you an example. It was probably about, I'm just going to take a wild guess, it was maybe 5-6 years ago. And now you're talking, for me, I mean, it was always a struggle for me to go to school because I'm stupid, right? I was, well, considered stupid. Yeah, what I thought. Plus struggling with the disability. So there's the layers upon the layers. And I was like, I want to really peel these layers off, and I want to really challenge myself.
Right.
So I decided I'm going to go back to school, right? And I wanted to really focus on working with kids. So part of this, there was a really strict process I had to go through.
And this is at college level?
This was being a court-appointed special advocate for kids. So you had to go through a process of the interviews, be ready to answer a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. And long story short, I was extremely transparent. I didn't come this far to hide anything, you know?
Right.
And so they accepted me, right?
I love that.
And so probably about a couple months into school, I received a call one evening, one late afternoon, and said, "You can't come back." And I was like,
"What?"
Exactly. That's exactly what I said. I was like, wait a minute, taking my phone and cleaning it. Can you say that again? And it turned around that they said that, so apparently one of the things I had to do was get an FBI background check, right? Mm-hmm. Which is understandable. You're going to be working with kids eventually. Yeah. And so my background check came back with convictions, right? So I'm like, this has to be a big mistake. I was the victim. Right, if I had convictions, I would know it. No, I'm not in law. I'm not an attorney. I'm not an FBI agent. But I would think I would know if I had convictions. So I said, there has to be a big mistake. I says, I don't have convictions. They says, well, we're looking at your rap sheet and you have 3 convictions. Wow. And I'm like, oh, would you mind sending it to me? You know, like now.
You're like panicking.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. They said, we can't do that. And I'm like, what? Wow. And I'm like, it's mine. You're calling me. You're telling me I can't come back. You're telling me what I have. And now you're telling me I can't have a copy of it. No, you have to redo your prints. And I'm like, talk about trauma. This is why I say this is a process, You have to have that tool belt on at all times. So long story short, I said to the lady on the other end of the phone, I said, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, I said, I will be back. I'll be back. I said, I'm coming back. She said, no, you're not. Wow. I said, really? I said, I'm going to take care of this, and I am coming back. She said, no, we can't take you back, even if you take care of this. I said, and why is that? She said, because you lied on your application. We're on the application where it says, have you ever been convicted of a crime? I put no.
Wow.
How are you supposed to answer yes if you have no idea you were convicted?
Right.
Right?
Right.
So I put no, but that was my honest answer. But I was called a liar.
Wow.
Okay? So long story short, thankfully, well, it wasn't thankfully at the time. I was leaving my home that evening, and you talk about those old voices.
Yeah.
Well, I was here and struggling with those old voices and the phone call all happening at the same time. At once, yep. And all of a sudden I'm like, psh.
Yep, you just go down.
And I went to, my husband said to me, he says, hey, do good in school tonight. I said, okay. He didn't know about the call.
Oh, wow.
I went to a bar and I had a couple shots. And then I realized, I caught myself and realized what I was doing. Yep. It's not that I can't have a drink. It was like, why I was having a drink, it was not the right time. It was like I was using old tactics to mask my pain.
Yeah, to numb it.
And I just says, I can't do this anymore. I can't deal with people and places and things. It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
And just something came over me, Melanie, and I was like, I need to get out of here. And I needed to find the safe person. And that was the best thing I did, was find a safe person that I was able to communicate with. She found someone from Volunteer Lawyers for Justice, and my cases have been vacated. I still have one that I'm working on, but, you know, I have to say it was like, there's no more shame, there's no more fear. Yeah. But the world will let you down. The world will remind you, whether it be in a workplace, whether it be in your personal relationships. But I think it's so important that we don't need to spill out the details of our life to everybody just because we think that they're a safe coworker.
So, you know what? I love that you just said that, because my next question for you is exactly this, right? Because we do this work, and because our lived experience is our expertise and is a part of our work, we sometimes feel like we're obligated, or people make us feel like we're obligated to disclose. But that's not the case, right? We don't have to tell every detail of our story to everybody just because, especially coworkers. How do you navigate?
We have to be able to discern who we choose to invite in our lives.
And tell our stuff too.
I am a big proponent as far as when it comes to my personal and professional life, who I choose to walk alongside of. I'd rather have less than more to feel that I know that I can trust you. And that is so important. I remember when I first started doing this work, I thought I had to share details. And looking back, I mean, I've come such a long way. I may give a snapshot here and there, but I don't need to share details anymore unless I choose to.
Exactly.
And not only unless I choose to, but depending on who I choose to. You know, if I want to shout out to the world about my past, then I choose to do that. But nobody makes those choices for me anymore. But most importantly, I had to navigate through two best friends of mine. Two. And that was fear and shame.
Wow.
Shame and fear crippled me. They captivated me. They consumed me. And once I was able to work through those layers of my recovery, and peeling those layers, they were painful, Melanie. But when I got to the core is when I found my truth, my identity, and my freedom. Nobody can take that away from me again unless I allow that person to take it away from me. Nobody could say anything to hurt me anymore unless I give them that power that they just made me. I may have like a terrible few minutes or a next half hour or an hour, but they're not going to destroy my day because I only have today.
There are a lot of times that when we're in our workplaces, we can be harmed by people who have the best intentions, right? Or that are not ill-intentioned. We have supervisors, we have colleagues that do this work with us who mean well, but they cause harm in some kind of way. Or when you call them out on the harm that they cause, they don't take it well. They don't want to acknowledge their behaviors and things like that. How would you say, or how would you suggest trying to build trust and or repair that kind of relationship? Because it happens in many anti-trafficking organizations and many nonprofits where they really care about the issue and want to support their mission, but they end up hurting survivors in the process. What do you think about that?
If something feels wrong, that should be your guide.
Follow your instincts.
It doesn't mean that workplaces cannot be a safe environment, but I would recommend that certain things are put in place. So if you feel that Gina may not be the safest person to talk to in that workplace, it's okay to seek someone else out. You know, the companies have certain compliances for human resources that they have to adhere to. And that's with equal employment opportunity. And also with the ADA law, where they have to provide accommodations for their employees. And when we talk about the ADA law, we're not talking about with American Disability Act. We're talking about it doesn't have to be someone who maybe can't get to their workplace without a wheelchair or without some type of assistance. This law also falls under the American Disability Act for those who are suffering mental health depression or any mental health crisis or anything, depression or anything at all that's a struggle. There should be a safe place that's and this will be found in the policy and procedure into the employee handbook.
Right. How do you feel we can deal with doing the work that we do without having to prove our worth to our employers, to organizations, to the public? What can we do and how can we do it?
Fake it till you make it.
Exactly.
Don't compromise.
I love that. Don't compromise.
Know the minimum wage know what your wages are for that, not only for that state, but for that job. That is very important. And if you believe that the skills you're bringing to the table is worth more than $20 an hour,
okay.
And then I would say negotiate. Don't say, okay, I'll settle for $19.
Yes.
Negotiate. Be confident. And role play. You can role play too. But I would say don't settle because we could be re-exploited in the workplace in a different way. Different way of re-exploitation comes in many different forms.
Yeah.
And people that are not aware of the signs of coercion and fraud and manipulation and being tricked into sex or labor trafficking, they're going to be totally clueless most of the time when it comes to these signs, being groomed, being exploited, being vulnerable. And they do this. This goes on in the workplace. Some intentional and some not intentional. And I say workplaces also need to continue educating themselves on the laws of sexual harassment, of how to treat employees with respect and dignity, and having on staff good listeners, people that are going to be good advocates, because you want to foster your employees, you want to help them grow,
right? Because
their outcome is going to be as good as you are, even the delegating.
Right. Is there any other ways that you feel that that a workplace environment, employers, organizations, nonprofits can better support sex trade survivors or just survivors of complex trauma in general? Is there anything that they can do if they're listening?
Yeah, they need to respect the safe place for their employees. Conversation should not be had outside the workplace.
It's big.
Confidentiality and safety are two huge priority components. And also providing resources for them, because every company should have resources for an employee that they can go to. And, checking in on them, asking them, what can we do to help you?
And recognizing that.
Recognizing them and being a good listener.
Yeah.
It makes a difference when you can just listen to someone who's struggling.
Yeah.
And not feel threatened by that I'm going to lose my job if I tell you.
And recognizing that survivors need specific resources and services that might look different than your other employees.
Absolutely.
That's super, super important. Gina, I like to end all of my episodes just because I know that the work that we do is so hard. We can talk for hours about the negatives and the things that need improvement. And our traumas are very difficult, right? So I like to ask all of my guests to just tell me one thing briefly that you do something that you do that brings you joy, or something that, in a way that you use creativity as a form of resistance. Do you paint? Do you cook? How do you self-care? Give me something.
Oh, yeah. I actually love to paint.
I love that.
And in fact, I have a couple pieces of artwork that will be going on exhibit in New York in April.
Yes, congratulations.
Yes, and whatever doesn't sell that some survivors were part of, it's going to go on we're going to be selling it at our gala on May 14th at Bridgewater, New Jersey. And I love being with family and friends. I love cooking. Cooking is not only my passion, but it's my therapy. And I love hiking, and I love the beach. So there's a lot.
Oh, you got a good self-care plan. You got a good toolkit. Yeah. I need to follow you. I do not have my toolbox.
And I love my music. Yeah.
Music.
Yeah.
Yes. Me and music.
Everybody says, "What music do you?" I like all kinds of music. Yeah. I just like variety. It all depends on the mood.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Gina, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I know we can keep going for another 3, 4, 5 hours.
Thank you. You're rock. You're rock.
You amaze me.
I look up at you so much. I have so much respect and admiration for you.
We will put it in the show notes, everybody. Check out Gina's book, all the wonderful things that Gina does. Don't you have a website on yourself?
GinaCavallo.org.
There you go. So follow her. Figure out what she's up to.
Yeah.
And to the rest of you guys, join us next week where I'll be joined in studio by survivor advocates where we're going to talk about how to tell your story without being re-exploited or re-traumatized. See you then.